Hi, welcome back to Connecting with the Coaches. Feels like it's been a little bit since we've recorded, so we're a little shaky here getting started again. I think we'll be fine once we get going. This is a topic we've been wanting to talk about for a while, and I don't know, I think it's so interesting that it's been hard for us to get here. So I think maybe God's going to do something with this. So we're going to talk a little bit about trauma and cognitive dissonance and how these two things work together or work against us or whatever. So I'm going to give you a definition. I was looking, there are so many definitions, and it's like there's not really a settled definition on what this is. So I'm going to give a definition, and then Jen's going to give us some symptoms or characteristics of cognitive dissonance. So let's listen to this. Cognitive dissonance is a term for the state of discomfort felt when two or more modes of thought contradict each other. The clashing cognitions may include beliefs, ideas, or the knowledge that one has behaved in a certain way. And it's like, that's okay, but Jen, share with us what you found on the symptoms.
Well, I just want to add a little bit to that before I share the symptoms. But in my description of cognitive dissonance, it just said anyone can experience this uneasiness and their feelings don't align with their actions. And humans like consistency because that gives us a sense of control. And dissonance comes up when we realize that there are two things that are opposing each other. So that kind of
Yes,
lines up with what we're going to talk about, I
yeah,
think.
that's great.
So people with cognitive dissonance may experience embarrassment over feeling wrong beliefs that they previously held, shame or regret about past actions or decisions, guilt for hiding or something they believe is wrong, and discomfort for doing something that contradicts what they originally believed. So those go along with this, I think.
Yeah. And so we're talking about cognitive dissonance mainly in terms of adopting children with trauma. So we go into the adoption and we do all the training that's required by law, and we look up as much as we know to look up based on what we've heard. And other than that, we don't know anything. And you're kind of taught all along. Most people believe that kids are blank slates, and so once
Well, kids are resilient.
yes, blank slates or resilient, and neither of those are true, but we're taught that they are. And so you go into an adoption believing that love is enough, and all of a sudden you're home with a child whose behavior, first of all, they don't want you to love them, and they'll do anything to push you away, and then they may have destructive behaviors, especially the crazy lying, the manipulating, the gaslighting, the things where it really starts to rock your emotional and psychological and spiritual world, um, because you never knew that that could happen. And so you had a belief, and now you're experiencing a reality that totally contradicts that. And you don't have a clue what to do with it. And then you take it to other people, and no one else is seeing what you're seeing. And even the counselors don't know what you're talking about most of the time. And the adoption agency may blame you for it. So I just remember feeling kind of, pushed back in my chair, like, what is happening? I don't even know if I know what reality is anymore. So you guys share how you felt, or
Yeah, I think I was actually just talking to a client about that this morning. And I think that what sometimes happens is it causes us to freeze because we know what we're experiencing, but the rest of the world doesn't experience it the same way. So we sort of freeze in the space of like, if I tell someone this, what will they think? I better just keep it to myself. Right. So I froze it personally, I froze in that space for a really long time.
yeah,
Yeah.
I kind of have the opposite interact. Like I'm a verbal processor, so I was looking to talk it out with somebody and try to understand the chaos.
Mhm.
And I remember posting in one of the adoption mom groups, and it wasn't a rad group. This was early on before I realized what we were dealing with. But I remember saying, what do you do when you're a when you have all these different reactions, trauma reactions, stress reactions? So I was like, I'm a fighter, my husband's a freezer, I have two sons, one's a fighter, one's more, he's not really a freezer, but kind of, um he's the calm one. And then my adopted girls, I have a fighter and a freezer. Like, I knew that we were all triggered, and I
Mhm.
knew what our reaction to the trigger was, but I had no idea what to do with that.
Right. You know, I remember we adopted, I'm so much older than all of you. We adopted in a time when there was no internet.
Mhm.
So if you can imagine such a thing. And there was no help out there, and if it wasn't in the yellow pages, you couldn't find it. And so I didn't have any resources. I didn't have anybody to ask those kind of questions to. And I didn't even really understand that our son had had developmental trauma. Nobody explained that to us. And so, it started really wearing on our family. And you can find my story in lots of other places. But after 8 years of this, I didn't even know it at the time, but I had PTSD. And I want to talk a little bit about how even this cognitive dissonance feeds into the PTSD, and I think makes it worse, because when you have these contrasts and you like adoption, it's just offering love. If you have extra room and you have extra love in your heart and you can afford it, basically, then you can bring in a child and complete your family or whatever, and then when you get the child home and you realize this is not, I mean, we had already adopted once, and our other son was adopted at birth, and there was a huge difference between this and a child who had been institutionalized for several years. So just the conflict in my brain, trying to make sense of this, like, how could this be? How could this little child be sabotaging everything? How could they be pushing me? I don't understand this. And so then it creates PTSD, and now I'm paranoid, and now I'm hyper vigilant all the time, and I'm not sleeping, and my health is declining, and I'm triggered all the time, and I don't know what to do, and I don't even know what it's called. You know, we had placed our son into his new home, and the therapist that I was working with at that time, who really saved my life, I think God used her to save my life. um, I said to her, I've heard something about adoptive families and secondary PTSD. Is that what I have? I mean, she had never told me. She was already treating me, but she said, oh no, honey, it's not secondary. There's nothing secondary about this. This is full blown
This is yours.
PTSD. Yeah. And that actually was cognitive dissonance to me. Like,
Mhm.
how could this be? And also placing your child in another home. That makes no sense in our controlled, Jen,
Yeah.
the world that we think we understand. It's like that's not even an option on the checkoff boxes of, you grow up and go to college, get married, have some kids. That's not one of the options on there, is, place a child in another home, or residential treatment, or in a boarding school to keep your family safe. Oh, that's not even an option. And so here we are with like layer upon layer of cognitive dissonance. And in my family, I had it coming in from two other sources as well. And I'm sure as you guys did too, where family members don't understand. And then all of a sudden there's accusations and judgment. And so the world that you thought you had grounding on, and even for us, it was our church too. We thought we were stable there. Those were the things that no matter what happens, they'll be there for us. And then something happens, and all of a sudden, yank, you don't have that anymore. And so here's more cognitive dissonance, which feeds into more trauma. What do you guys say about that?
Oh, I agree to everything you said. Yes, it is so, like you said, it is layers of it. And I think that when you're constantly bombarded with, like, the concept of rad to me didn't even really occur to me until very much later in the game.
Yeah.
And so you're going for the stretch of time trying to manage the situation with no direction at all.
No
You're
resources.
thinking, yeah, you're just thinking you're absolutely like losing your mind because this cannot possibly be normal. And then you have the flip side of them, manipulating everyone in public. And I literally kept saying to myself, am I the crazy one? I mean, why do I feel like I'm the only one seeing this? But then when you learn more about RAD, you understand the intricacies of that,
Well, and also if it
diagnosis.
starts
And
splitting in your marriage, the triangulation that
oh,
comes
yes,
where beforehand your spouse would have believed anything you said and would be on your side and all of that. But we need people to understand that's part of the definition of rad, is that the child triangulates and presents themselves one way to one spouse and one way to another. And it's usually all of the vitriol is aimed at mom, not
yeah,
always, but mostly. And so the dads can't see it. And
no,
it sounds crazy. I'm sure that's the cognitive dissonance to them. How could my wife all of a sudden be talking about this when it makes
yes,
no sense to me? And so they just dig in and work harder and try to make it okay, and they don't know what to do. And there's cognitive dissonance in the marriage, and then also with the other kids in the home. Yeah.
yes. Amy and I were just talking recently about the fact that our situations were so similar and that our husbands were gone for good chunks of time. Amy's husband more than mine, but mine worked 24-hour shifts.
Right.
So, he didn't see as much on a daily basis as myself and the kids did, so then you do feel more isolated. You feel like, oh my gosh, I can't even like really relate to my husband in this situation because he's not experiencing it like I am.
Right.
But then the triangulation also happens, so you're forced into a corner of that triangle that you don't want to be in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
In the first couple of months, we were military, so which is why he was gone a lot. And then we also moved. And so the people who were my support when we started the gig were no longer there when we actually brought them home and got involved. And so I'm looking for people to process what. And so I called back to this lady who's adopted like 8 kids from the former place that we used to live, from my former adoption group. And I'm like, help. I'm like, what? And
What
she
is
goes,
it?
tell me again. I'll never forget it. She said, tell me again how long you've been home. And I told her like a month, or I don't remember. It was super earlier. And she goes, oh yeah, that's right. You went about the same time we did. You're calling from hell. And I remember thinking, why does nobody say that?
Right.
Wow.
Why does nobody tell you that it turns to hell and
Mm.
that that's normal? And so for the first year, I believed that I was in hell and it was normal. And all we had to do was basically get through the first
Wait it
year.
out.
And
Yeah.
so I'm going to just, I think I can through it all. And that's the kind of person I am. I just figure it out. I just muscle through it. I just shut down the part that I don't understand, and I focus on trying to understand and do something,
Yeah.
because I'm a fighter.
Well, and
And
I
so
think it
that's what I
impacts
did for
us.
a year. And then the end of the first year, I really believed my video is a selfie of us. No worse for the wear. We made it, right? No, the second year was worse, and the third year was worse than that.
Yeah.
Well, and I was just thinking as you were speaking, Amy, about what it does to us emotionally. So you're isolated, you're alone, you're scared to death that you're going crazy. You're probably depressed, you're probably anxious, you might be struggling with sleep, you've got PTSD kind of symptoms starting up. And then relationally, you're struggling with your spouse, you're probably struggling with your other children, you're for certain struggling with the child that has reactive attachment disorder. And then when we talk about like psychologically, whether there's the, the mood issues and the sleep and the PTSD and all of that. And then we're also talking about spiritually, because for all of us, at least us three, and most of our clients, not all of our clients, but many of them, have felt they were specifically and deliberately called by God into this adoption. And so whether we heard a sermon or whether it just tugged on our heart, for me, I have an adopted brother, and that was always something I knew I was going to do. So, and we already had one adopted child, so, we're doing pretty good. Let's do it again. So we did that, and you have no idea what that does to somebody spiritually, because you start to believe the lie that God did a bait and switch on you, that he set you up for failure, that he knew it was going to happen and he made you do it this kind of thing. And that, when you feel like your faith, and then if your church doesn't handle it well, which mine did not, we ended up churchless for 6 years after that. And so thankfully, I know just God held on to me, and he just kept reassuring me that he was there. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know. I mean, for a long time, I couldn't even hear him because of the trauma. And that's one thing I work with clients on all the time is, what do you do when you feel like God just raked you over the coals, like for fun almost? And it's just not true. And that I've been healing from that a lot lately.
Right.
Just recognizing that he is good all the time, because it's not even in his character to do those things I said before. He can't. It's not that he won't, but he can't, because his character is that he is only good and he is only holy and he is only righteous. And so he's not the one messing here. There is messing going on, but it's not from him. He's the savior and the provider and the healer and the restorer and the redeemer. And so we just have to but the cognitive dissonance in us can make us see that incorrectly as well.
And
Sure.
the whole idea that it's our cognitive dissonance, or you mentioned the husbands, but the kids are coming in and they're having their own, like, what in the world? These people are not like those orphanage people, but
Yeah.
they're hiding, they have to be. I'm 3 years old, I'm 4 years old. I know what people are like, right? And so they have their own too, that they don't have any I mean, here we are, we're not coping with our
We have
own,
fully processed, fully
and how
developed
can we help
brains.
them? And then the other thing I wanted to say is that if you are an adult survivor of your own childhood trauma, which is not fully processed, then you're dealing with your coping mechanisms that helped you manage your cognitive dissonance, your need for a parent who was neglectful or alcoholic, or whatever your history is. You have a coping mechanism that you've developed for that, and it works to keep the coping is to keep your own nervous system functional, right? So you have your way of doing this, which for me was, get in there and work it and figure it out and fix it and manage it and keep everybody happy and healthy and safe. And I just tried to manage everybody's plates, and that was impossible. And I kept trying to do the impossible because that was how I did it.
Yeah.
So now I'm dealing with the cognitive dissonance of my own, I can do this. That pushed through that first year. And then when you realize, yeah, I'm not doing it. So then we get into, for me, it really got into that shame-based piece, because I was losing it. I was looking for help. There wasn't any. I was seeing doctors. I was being over-medicated. My body was really a mess. So I really was not okay.
Yes.
And then I got into just the whole shame cycle of I am bad. I should not, they deserve better. And then there's a whole new level from there into moral injury of I thought this was the right thing and I'm totally doing it wrong. And now what? There's just so much survival mode and so much confusion.
Yes.
To do it alone in isolation is just unspeakable.
Yeah. Let's talk just a little bit about, because I don't want to leave people in a hopeless place, because this is hard. We've all lived this. Our clients have all lived this. Some of them are living it right now. If you've never met our ministry before, we are all the coaches with Carrie O'Toole Ministries. So you can just go to carrieotoole.com and look up the coaches. And if you like what you're hearing from one or better than the other, you can book a session with whoever kind of hits what you would need. But we want to offer some hope here, because once you recognize that there is a cognitive dissonance and you have had trauma, then we can start walking through that, because then it starts to make sense again. Then your brain kind of calms down a little bit, because you're not in a panic all the time. I have found, though, that even with world events and things that are going on right now, I found myself digging a little here and there, trying to find out what the truth is, because I feel like we've all been so gaslit over the last years. Like, as a people, we've just been gaslit. And I think that I have had so much cognitive dissonance in my life that I'm almost terrified to have that rug yanked out again. So I've kind of started snooping around on my own, looking in little corners and stuff to find things at my pace, because the cognitive dissonance is when it hits so fast and you don't have a time to adjust, and all of a sudden your world is just flipped upside down. So that, I think that's one of the ways that I've coped, is to kind of learn the information at my speed. I remember even with our son, with his diagnoses, every time I'd get a new diagnosis, and there were numerous, it felt like you had to almost take a graduate level course in that diagnosis to try to understand it, to know how to parent that, then how to explain it to teachers and at the church and in sports and all of that kind of stuff. And so it was always so hard and fast that that's where the dissonance came in. So I find that I do better learning things on a slower pace and not having to, take it in from a fire hose, because that really trips me up. And I'm sure that's the PTSD. But how do you guys find that you cope with it today as you're healing?
Well, I think for me, just recognizing anything that triggers any of that, and setting healthy boundaries in my life. And just knowing that, looking back, what I feel like what we as coaches can offer to clients is just that there's hope outside of your current situation. And, oftentimes when I say that to a client, that's when you get the tears. And I can remember being in that space of just so much despair. And, when Amy described, like, the phone call from hell, it's like you feel like your
Yes.
life sentence is this, and there is no way out. And I feel like, just projecting into the future a little bit, like it won't always be this hard,
Yeah.
no
Jen,
matter what you make.
you just brought up a scripture that I pulled up as you were talking. This is Romans 5, 3-5. It says, not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings,
Mhm.
which, we'll coach you through that.
Yeah.
We've had to learn this too. Knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us.
Mhm.
That's the way out, you know.
Yes.
So we acknowledge the suffering. Okay, we're learning endurance through that. That's producing character in us, which we needed anyway, but we didn't have it to start, which then produces the hope, and that gets us out of the hopelessness. And that doesn't put us to shame. So that takes care of the shame, Amy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, glory. Yeah.
Last thoughts here.
I think my coping has evolved over time. Initially my coping was to make everybody feel better. Like I felt responsible for everybody's feelings. And so I was like the court gesture trying to make everybody happy. But eventually I came to understand that attachment was mine. Like and my nervous system. And so when you understand that an attachment issue is a child's nervous system is not feeling safe with your nervous system, well, I wasn't feeling safe with my own nervous system. So to start to really focus on what is happening inside of me, because the cognitive dissonance is that reality is not matching my feeling or
Right.
what I believe. That's where it all is, right? And
Mhm.
so starting to really focus on, instead of focusing on helping the kids, focus on help myself. And so, I mean, unfortunately, I started with physical doctors who messed me up even more. And so it took a couple more years for me to be able to peel. And we moved again, is actually what happened. And I found a new doctor, and they were like, You what? They did what? And so that helped me get out of that. But then eventually, after decisions were made about the kids and their trauma bond and all of that, and we got through relinquishment and residential treatment, all that stuff. Um, in the process, I went back to school because how I cope is I need to understand
I think that's
what
all of
just
us.
happened. And so going back to school and really focusing on traumatology and trying to understand what happened for all of us, and to get out ahead of it then, 'cause, like, my heart is to get out ahead of it and to really help people with complex PTSD who are trying to do this, who are met with their history and their present colliding, like happened for me. And so I think my coping has evolved over time, and as the longer we get away from the relinquishment and things settle in certain ways, the better I feel too. Of course, I think it just takes time for your nervous system to heal after you've been through something like that, and to really wrap your mind around it.
Well, and having the patience for yourself, because I think we all kind of shamed ourselves, and I think that's part of the trauma. And that's what trauma does to us. It makes us feel like it's our fault. And how could, if you were a better person, this never would have happened to you. And, we have clients who are doctors and counselors. I've had therapists who work with kids with RAD in residential treatment centers, and then all of a sudden they adopt one and it's totally different. And now they're the one needing help. And it's really a humbling thing. And I think it exposes our pride. It exposes anywhere where we thought we were able, or whatever, and we're not.
Yeah.
And yeah, Jen, any last thoughts there for you?
I just piggybacking on what you just said, I think that God really sort of chiseled and pruned some things out of me that through this situation. I used to be just a big people pleaser, to be very honest, and I really am not. I mean, I'm getting better. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but it's definitely not in the forefront of my mind. And I think God knew that He needed me to be more focused on Him and not focused on everybody else. And so this whole process of like the shame and the judgment from other people has really taught me like that's not my priority. So that's
Yes.
one.
That's so good. And I think just one last thing here before we go is God is the healer. And what I have come to discover, and I don't have a biblical reference for this, but I've really seen that he wants the praise and the glory, not because he's an egotistical maniac, but because we need to know. We need to know what he did. And so many times he wants us to know what is wrong when we pray for healing, so that we will know that he did it, and then we can give him the praise and the glory. And so for me, I know it's been a process of healing certain things, and it's like when he brings it to my mind, then I can pray for that, for healing over that. And then when he does it, I know it's him, because these things you can't heal on your own. I mean, the medical community, the counseling community, the psychological community, they don't know. They try, they can offer tips and things like that, but the deep healing
Yes.
is from God, the Father Almighty, and Jesus Christ. So we just, that's where we come from. And if you need some help from any of us, please reach out. It is a process, but we've all done it. We're still doing it, and we've helped hundreds of other families. So we hope we can be there for you too as well. So reach out if you need it. Anyway, thanks you guys for such a good conversation. I feel like we've been needing this for a while. So until next time, we'll see you again next time.